The grimdark future of Warhammer 40K is full of creepy, unsolved mysteries, and in this series, we're going to be getting to the bottom of each and every one of them. In this video, we're going to be examining the mystery surrounding Zaranoga, the Outsider, rumored to be the last intact Catan. The lore indicates that during the War in Heaven, the Outsider would end up devouring a lot of the other Catan, growing in power and size after each meal. Only problem was, he didn't just absorb their power, but their minds as well. The shrieking, wailing of his tortured kin, endlessly echoing in his head, caused him to go absolutely insane. In madness, he would eventually flee into the void between galaxies in a self-imposed exile. As is tradition in 40K, the lore surrounding the Outsider is vague, cryptic, and has left our community with more questions than answers. Who exactly was the Outsider and how powerful was he? If all of the Catan were eating each other during their civil war, why was it only the Outsider who went insane? How did he manage to escape the wrath of the Necrons and stay intact when all of the other Catan failed? Well, what if I was to tell you that it's unlikely he didn't just escape, the Necrons tried to kill him and failed? What if I was to tell you that the Outsider may just be the most powerful entity to have ever dwelt within the physical universe, and that his return is not only inevitable, but imminent? Well, in this video, we're going to be getting into all that and a whole lot more, as I spent the better half of a week gathering together every single source that ever mentioned him, and it led me down a pretty crazy rabbit hole. But before we get into all that, a quick shout out to this video's sponsor. I don't know if you can relate to this, but it feels like every day that goes by, I somehow have even less time for all of the hobbies that I love. Trying to balance work, home, social life, and a million other responsibilities can be pretty overwhelming and leaves me with no time for mini painting or tabletop gaming. That's why I've been using Factor, the sponsor of today's video, to take back some of my me time. If you're unfamiliar with them, Factor saves you a ton of time by eliminating cooking, prep time, cleanup, and trips to the grocery store. Their meals are nutritious, delicious, ready in just 2 minutes, and shipped right to your door. I've been using Factor for a few years now, and I always felt like they had a ton of options to choose from. But apparently that wasn't enough, as they recently doubled the size of their menu to 80+ rotating weekly meals. I'm talking 3 times the amount of new restaurant quality meals, 2 times more seafood options, twice as many high protein meals, and a new customization option that allows you to swap proteins at no additional cost. Do you love chicken but hate pork chops? No problem, Factor's got you covered. If I'm being honest with you, I'm the type of guy who's always struggled with my weight. I love exercising and I don't have much of a sweet tooth, but portion control was always my sticking point. Factor's pre-portioned meals give me the exact right amount of food that I need to leave me feeling full and ready to take on my day. If you're like me and you want to take control of your nutrition and get back some of your hard-earned free time, then head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code WesHammer FB50 to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. That's code WesHammer FB50 at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. Big thanks to Factor for sponsoring this video. If you're anything like me, and you're a fan of H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, all of his elder gods, and pretty much anything cosmic horror, then you'll feel right at home reading up on the lore of the Catan. Now, often described as the gods of the physical universe, the Catan were formless vampiric entities of a colossal scale that could devour the stars themselves. Although some were said to be more powerful than others, from the human perspective, each and every one of them possessed a seemingly limitless potential for destruction, and was able to fracture and reshape the fabric of space and time according to their own twisted desires. These were beings that could conjure black holes with a snap of their fingers and eradicate entire systems single-handedly. At present, in the 41st and 42nd millennia, the Necrons are known to harness the power of 3 distinct Catan: Mephetron the Deceiver, Azagorod the Nightbringer, and most recently, Magladroth the Void Dragon. I should also point out that there's the Transcendent Catan as well, because somebody's going to bring it up in the comment section, but these aren't named Catan, they're created by combining dozens of lesser shards together. Anyways, although those 3 are the only ones we're ever really shown in the lore, this isn't all of them. There used to be way more Catan back before the War in Heaven. We aren't given exact figures here on just how many of them there were, but it's a safe assumption that there was at least dozens, potentially even hundreds of unique Catan. We had beings such as Ishrada the Endless Swarm, Ogdriada the Arisen, Igrana the World Shaper, Nyadrazatha the Burning One, and Leandragor the Flayer, to name only a few. So if that's true, then what happened to the rest of them? Where are they? Well, the lore insinuates that after the War in Heaven, the Necrons would end up rising up against the Catan who had enslaved them in the past. While they were in their weakened state, after battling the old ones, they would end up destroying them and shattering them into shards. The Catan that we see in the tabletop game and in the modern lore are just a piece of a larger Catan. They're not a whole being. However, although this is the widely accepted theory, it really only accounts for the 3 that we actually see. So what happened to the rest of them? Well, to understand that, we first have to understand the Catan Civil War, which took place near the tail end of the War in Heaven, but before the Necron Uprising. An event said to have occurred either just before the Old Ones were defeated or immediately after, depending upon the source you're reading. You see, originally, before the Catan even met the Necron tier, they were formless entities that would drift through the void eating stars. But after they aligned with the Necron tier against the Old Ones and convinced them to undergo biotransference, thus becoming the living metal skeletons we know today, the Catan would end up devouring their souls. This new form of energy was unlike anything they had ever tasted, a delicacy of such richness that it caused them to hunger for more. As the war dragged on, the Catan consumed more and more stars while also feeding upon the souls of uncounted trillions, enslaving entire worlds as they spread out across the galaxy. Now eventually, the Catan's unchecked greed and gluttony spiraled into madness. Their attention turned inward as each one of them believed themselves the greatest of their kind. Soon, the Catan fell upon one another in a fratricidal war that saw planets razed, stars extinguished, and entire systems swallowed by their unleashed black holes. Each time one of them was slain, the victor devoured them. This went on until only 5 remained: the Deceiver, the Nightbringer, the Void Dragon, the Flayer, who ended up getting killed off-screen by the Necrons and shattered so completely that no shards are known to exist. But there was also a mysterious 5th entity known as Zaranoga, the Outsider. After the Necron Uprising, it would be the Outsider that was the only one of the Catan that managed to escape their vengeance. But how did he accomplish this? Well, the lore here is unfortunately pretty vague, but it seems to have not been a deliberate choice. After consuming so many of his own kind, his consciousness, power, and form fusing with theirs, he went irreversibly insane. The minds of every Catan the Outsider had consumed merged with his own in a screaming gestalt consciousness of madness and hatred. No longer able to function properly, the Outsider fled into the void between galaxies in a self-imposed exile, never to be seen again. This is the story that the majority of sources that mention the Outsiders tell us to be true, although it's always presented in a classically vague and cryptic manner. But if you stop to think about it, this description doesn't really make complete sense. If all of the Catan were eating each other, why was the Outsider the only one who went insane? I mean, more insane than a normal Catan. Why didn't this happen to the Deceiver, the Nightbringer, or the Void Dragon? How did the Outsider actually manage to escape the wrath of the Necrons, as the source material is telling us that he was in a fractured state and probably wouldn't be able to defend himself as easily as the other ones could? Surely, if the Necrons were able to shard the Nightbringer, then one that can barely function should have been an easy target, right? And there's no way the Silent King would have just let him go after what the Catan did to his people. Well, what if I was to tell you that the reason the Necrons didn't destroy the Outsider wasn't because he managed to give them the slip, but was because they tried and failed? What if the reason the Outsider was displaying such profound symptoms of insanity in contrast to the other Catan wasn't just bad luck on his part, but was because he was the only cannibal amongst them, and the resulting being that arose at the end of the Catan Civil War was the single most powerful and destructive entity ever to blight real space? Okay, so to explore this theory, we need to rewind a little bit and go back to the beginning of the Catan Civil War. We need to know what the inciting incident was that turned them all against each other. The first place to start is with the Deceiver, as his codex entries tell us that he played a role in this. It states that since he was the weakest of the Catan physically, he instead used his trickery and guile to turn his siblings against each other instead of going after him. Most people take this to mean that it was the Deceiver himself that started the war, but I personally don't believe this to be the case. This bit of lore about him to me reads more of an explanation of how he managed to survive the war and not how it started. To understand that, we have to go to a relatively obscure source, a 3-part article examining Eldar myths and legends that was published in White Dwarf issue 273 all the way back in 2002. Now, the entire article is definitely great and worth a read for yourself, but for the purposes of a video on the Outsider, we're just going to focus on the middle part. It's here that we're presented with a transcript of a conversation between an Eldar outcast named Yvrel and Raffles Keneg, a Imperial self-proclaimed expert on infiltrating fringe Xeno societies. Yvrel recounts to him a story of a Harlequin performance she once witnessed aboard her former craft world of Iyanden. The play began with a troop of Harlequins hovering high into the air, spreading out across a vast domed amphitheater. Each one of them wore a Dathidi suit, and as one, the suits ignited, bursting into a dazzling display of light, each actor representing a star. Shortly after the play began, and without warning, a new figure emerged in the center of the performance. It was gaunt, faceless, and spindly, shrouded in billowing rags. Yvrel explained that she could scarcely put into words the terror it evoked, admitting that she had to suppress an urge to get up out of her seat and flee out of the theater when its gaze fell upon her. The creature in the play is referred to as the Ingir, which is the Eldar word for Catan. It began to drift slowly amongst the stars, seizing each performer one by one. With every touch, they convulsed violently, and their light began to dim until it faded completely. With each star devoured, the amphitheater slowly descended further and further into darkness. Now it's at this point that a handful of smaller Ingir appear next, portrayed by death jesters. They spread out through the vaulted chamber, carrying out their own star feast, but they're not as efficient or as large as the one in the center. Then, with a blinding burst of light, the feast was interrupted by another figure who appeared without warning. It was a radiant Harlequin wearing a grinning mask. The laughing god Chegarak had appeared. The great Ingir turned to face the newcomer, and the audience could almost feel the waves of hatred and contempt radiating from it. It drifted forward, seized the Harlequin by the face, and drained him of life as it had done the others, casting the limp body to the floor with a deafening thud. This time, the monstrous wraith grew larger and more terrible in its triumph. But then something strange occurred. The corpse of the laughing god down on the stage below began to shift and change, revealing itself as one of the lesser Ingir. In that instant, the laughing god reappeared behind the Star Leech, his suit shimmering in a kaleidoscope of mocking colors. Once again, the Ingir whirled and struck, seizing the trickster and draining him dry. Yet again, the body transformed into another of his lesser kin. The cycle repeated over and over until the laughing god had deceived the Ingir into consuming all of its brethren. With each meal, the creature grew larger and larger until it was practically filling the entire room. Its once fluid movements grew erratic and jerky, its body distorting under the weight of its own madness. The faces of the devoured began to ripple across its metallic skin, each one screaming in terror and hatred. The air in the amphitheater grew heavy, the tension so thick that Yvrel swore the audience could feel the madness pressing against them. Then, in a flash, the laughing god appeared all around the Ingir, above, below, and beside it, a storm of color and motion. The Star Leech clawed desperately at the illusions, but they slipped through its fingers. Shrieking in confusion and hate, it collapsed inward, shrinking until only a dim spark remained, coalesced into a black flickering orb in the room's center. Then, the illusions merged together into a single radiant figure. The laughing god hovered above his defeated foe, the entity undone by its own greed. The laughing god then turned to the audience and bowed. The room erupted in applause. But the performance wasn't over yet. All of the actors came back out, and the entire Harlequin troupe gathered around the orb, their masks now bearing the visage of vengeance. For a long moment, they hovered in solemn silence. But then, one by one, their masks shifted, transforming into the faces of dread. The orb began to crack, and an ominous red light spilled forth to illuminate the room. And that is where the performance truly ended. The Imperial transcriber of Yvrel's tale adds a final note to this account. Though he admits he doesn't know what an Ingir truly is, it's evident that the Harlequins fear the vengeance of this one in particular, for unlike its smaller kin, cannot be killed, and it will never rest until it has extinguished all life in its undying thirst for darkness. The big takeaway from this source is that it wasn't all of the Catan turning against one another as we had been led to believe. It was just one of them, who only did so because the Harlequin laughing god had tricked him into doing it. It's very possible that in the confusion and chaos such an event would cause, the alliances between the other Catan probably began to fracture as well. I wouldn't be so bold as to say that he was the only one who ever ate another Catan, but he was clearly the most successful, and the main antagonist in this particular account. The same source also confirms that the Outsider was never shattered, and is likely the only remaining intact Catan. And this isn't any old run-of-the-mill unshattered Catan. Oh no, that would be bad enough. It's an amalgamation of them, a super Catan unlike any that had come before, that will one day return to the Milky Way. Okay, so now let's turn back to the 3rd edition Necron Codex, where on the very first page, we get a prophecy that speaks of the end of all things, one that shall only come to pass after the Outsider returns. It foretells that the dead shall rise from their graves, and the galaxy will run red with the blood of the Eldar. The harbingers of this time will be the 4 great Catan. The Vol Moon will bring forth the dragon. The Master of Death shall drink deep from Isha's eye. The Jackal God will turn brother against brother, and that which lies outside will be drawn to the harvest. When the 4 take their place among the stars, their legion shall rise, unstoppable as the night. A deadly shroud will fall across the spirit, and the galaxy shall mourn. If it wasn't obvious, the Master of Death refers to the Nightbringer, the Jackal God to the Deceiver, the Dragon to the Void Dragon, and that which lies outside, the Outsider. On page 63 of this book, we get further insight into this future through an account from Farseer Mechu of Ulthwé, who, using his powers of clairvoyance, had witnessed these events firsthand. He speaks of the horrors that each will inflict upon reality. The Nightbringer will spread fear, terror, and seas of blood across the stars. The Deceiver will manipulate the galaxy to turn against each other and then march blindly into the soul forges, and the Void Dragon will enslave billions and force them to construct massive mechanical abominations that are fueled by their own emaciated forms. However, when it comes to the Outsider, it states this: I have seen the writhing, inverted geometries of the Outsider curl and tighten around his harvest as they clamber and crawl like vermin around his illogical labyrinth. Barely a shred of sanity exists in the broken minds of his prey, enough to comprehend the fact that they cannot escape his hideous paradigm, but not enough to quell the traitorous seed of hope that slithers unfulfilled within their breasts. But when will all of this occur? When will the Outsider actually return? Well, seeing as how the Void Dragon has recently been reintroduced to the setting, complete with a pretty sick model back in 9th edition, then in my opinion, the Outsider's return may just be right around the corner. Or maybe it's already happened. Okay, so on the very next page of this book, we get an account from a Voidsman explaining that within a region to the Galactic South, they have been having trouble getting astropathic messages out. This is something that is not unusual across the galaxy and is normally indicative of a naturally occurring warp storm or even a Tyranid hive fleet. Yet neither of these things were known to exist in that region. He requested that a team of Primaris Psychers be sent out to investigate, as this celestial anomaly, whatever it was, seemed to have a static range, though he had been unsuccessful in finding the precise source. Further, after thorough research, he wasn't able to find anything matching a description of the anomaly's precise effects in any Imperial records dating back to the 36th millennium, as something like this surely would have been documented in the past. The only logical explanation was that whatever was out there causing the disturbance had only recently arrived. The problem was, this individual was looking in the wrong place. He was looking within the galaxy's furthest spiral arm, when he should have been looking beneath it. In a separate account, recorded just prior to the outbreak of the Third Tyrannic War, the Imperium was tracking the encroaching Hive Fleet Leviathan as it made its way up from beneath the galactic plane. This was a trajectory that would have caused the Tyranids to enter into the Milky Way in the strange southern region discussed in the previous report. However, while they were still in the void of intergalactic space, the Hive Fleet abruptly changed course with little to no explanation. Imperial forces examined the data from the deep scans underneath the galaxy, trying to figure out what had caused this strange behavior. They could detect no star, nebula, nova, or large-scale phenomena of any kind that would account for this. After that had been ruled out, they really weren't expecting to find anything, but decided to be a bit more thorough and examine the footage one more time. As it turned out, something was out there, and what they saw didn't make any sense. The auguries revealed to them a spherical object of indeterminate origins and nature. The fact that they were able to see it at all should have been impossible. The deep scan imaging can only see things that produce their own light, such as stars, pulsars, quasars, etc. It wasn't producing light, it was reflecting it. And here's where things get truly bizarre. For it to register on the scans via reflected light alone indicated that whatever it was of a size either greater than 32 million standard Terran dimensions, i.e. over 32 million times larger than Earth, or had an albedo range of, quote, approaching infinite. Now, I'll admit, I had to look up what an albedo range even was after reading this. And in case you didn't know, an object's albedo is a measure of how much light it reflects. The scale runs from 0 to 1. A value of 0 represents total absorption. Think pitch black, while 1 represents perfect reflection, like a mirror or fresh snow. Earth, for example, has an average albedo of about 0.3. But here's the kicker, the scale doesn't go past 1. So in order for an object to have an albedo range greater than 1, it would need to reflect more light than it receives. It would have to amplify light. With an albedo range of infinite, if you were to hold up a candle to the surface of this thing, it would make it visible from anywhere in the universe. Now, obviously that's impossible, which is why my interpretation of this is that the albedo theory being proposed by the narrator is a deliberately exaggerated hypothetical, a way to emphasize the seeming impossibility of the first explanation. Because however unbelievable it sounds, the object's unconscionable size is the only explanation that fits within the known laws of physics. A user over in the 40K lore subreddit named PosiXthreads made a post examining both possibilities, and I'm just gonna tell you now, both are equally terrifying. So credit to them for doing the math. Okay, so this thing, whatever it is, has a radius 32 million times that of Earth. Our sun's radius is 100 times that of Earth, whilst the largest known star ever documented is around 2,500 times the radius of our own sun. This means that the largest star in the galaxy is 250,000 times the radius of Earth. When you put all of that together, it means that this object has a radius 128 times the largest known star, which can fit over 2 million copies of said star within it, or conversely, over 32,000 billion copies of Earth. Conversely, if the theory that its albedo range approaching infinity turns out to be true, and this thing floated up into the galaxy, the amount of energy it would reflect from all of the Milky Way stars would be enough to immediately incinerate the entire thing by its sheer energy output. Okay, but if all that's true, then what exactly is this object, and what does it have to do with the outsider? Well, the general consensus amongst the 40K lore community is that it's a Dyson sphere, and an absolutely gigantic one at that. If you're unfamiliar with them, a Dyson sphere is a hypothetical megastructure built to surround a star, which could then capture a large portion of its energy output. Now, normally unshattered Catan are said to be large enough to envelop entire stars, but this thing? If we assume that the outsider's inside and it fills out the entirety of this hollow sphere, then if it was unleashed, it would be large enough to swallow the entire Sol system more than 100 times over. Okay, so I did a little research trying to figure out where the Dyson sphere theory came from, and the most likely source is a condemned heretic named Adept Courtswain, who during an interview conducted by Adept Phineas stated that the one who lives beyond, the Lord of Insanity, dwells on the world within a world. During this exchange, he also vaguely implies that the outsider is the real machine god, that it was hungry and would one day come to enslave them all. Hey, Future Wes here, adding in a quick little section last minute as I was talking to my wife about the outsider and this crazy object outside of the galaxy, and she had a really good theory that I'm gonna be honest, I'm kind of embarrassed I didn't think of. She said that it's most likely a Tesseract vault, just an absolutely massive one, as that's what the Catan shards are normally held within. It's definitely something that's possible, and it would mean that the Necrons were, at bare minimum, able to capture and contain the outsider, even if they couldn't kill him. Whether or not this is true is anybody's guess, but I thought it was a good theory and I wanted to include it. Now, this is the part of the story where the mystery surrounding the outsider gets kind of shaky, and debates on whether or not he's still considered canon have gone back and forth within the 40K community for many years. The context of most of the lore that we've discussed today is that, with a few exceptions, most of it originated in the early 2000s with the Necron's 3rd edition codex. Back then, they were a very different faction, a bunch of soulless automatons captured and enslaved to the Catan, who were said to be intact gods. In 2011, with the 5th edition Necron Codex, the faction would get completely overhauled. They were no longer mindless slaves to the gods, but their conquerors. This is where we got the whole concept of the Catan shards from, as it didn't really exist before this. Most importantly, for the real-world timeline of events pertaining to the Outsider, the 5th edition book didn't mention him at all. This has led many Warhammer fans to believe that this is an indication from Games Workshop that the Outsider and his storyline were just another casualty of the 5th edition retcons. They believe that Games Workshop might have felt that the story of a surviving intact Catan didn't fit in this new rendition of the Necron's lore. The logical conclusion was that the Outsider most likely went the way of the Flayer, the Burning One, and the Endless Swarm, i.e. he was killed unceremoniously off-screen during the Catan Civil War. However, 7 years later in 2018, the 8th edition Necron Codex would drop, and in it, we got this cryptic passage. Some claim there exists a slumbering star god deep beneath the canyons of the red planet Mars. Others that the ravenous Catan known as the Outsider was tricked by Chegarak into eating his own brothers, and now it dwells in exile within a hollow planet far to the galactic south. Now, the first line is obviously referencing the Void Dragon and his resting place, and the second lines up exactly with the Dyson sphere theory for the Outsider. 3 years after this, the 9th edition Codex would drop, and the Void Dragon would finally grace us with its presence in the form of a sick new model for the tabletop game. In the Codex itself, we got another cryptic mention of the Outsider. The Outsider, Zaranoga, had fallen already to the trickery of the Laughing God, yet in its madness had it become terrible indeed. None could slay it, for its terror was too great to endure. Some tell that the Outsider rent itself asunder and was taken in its turn. Others warn that no prison ever trammeled it, that it alone of the Ingir never fell, and that one day it will return. Okay, so I know this doesn't tell us anything that we haven't already covered here, but that's the point. You gotta remember that before this moment in time, the community largely believed that the Outsider's entire storyline had been retconned. These passages are confirmation that that's not the case. More importantly, it even references the obscure material from the White Dwarf, and let's be honest, if anything was going to be retconned, it would be something from a magazine that most of the fan base didn't read. Unfortunately, as of the time of this recording, this is where the mystery surrounding the Outsider has come to a standstill. The 10th edition Necron Codex didn't give us any new pieces to the puzzle that I was able to find. Now, if you want my take on it, I absolutely think that we will see the Outsider return, if for no other reason than it's another expensive model that Games Workshop can sell to us Necron players. What that will look like, though, is anybody's guess. In order for them to make a model of the Outsider, then that would imply the Necrons were able to defeat him and bind his shards, which, just based on all of the information we've gone over so far, I don't know how that's possible. If one Catan is bad enough, then an insane amalgamation of dozens, if not hundreds of them, merged together into a body 32 million times larger than our planet sounds like something that may be too much even for them, as the Necrons aren't even close to how powerful they were during the War in Heaven when they did all of that in the first place. Maybe the Outsider in his madness will end up sharding himself, or maybe he will return fully intact and usher in an age of darkness unlike anything the galaxy's ever seen. But who knows, we'll just have to wait and see where Games Workshop decides to take his story in the future. Until then, the Outsider will remain one of 40K's creepiest unsolved mysteries. But what do you think of all this? Would you want to see the Outsider return to the setting? And if so, what form would you want them to take? I'm not gonna lie, as much as I love the idea of a Catan that's hundreds of times bigger and more powerful and more insane than the others as a big bad apocalyptic galaxy-ending threat that everyone's gonna have to deal with, I just really can't imagine how the authors would be able to work that into the storyline without the galaxy just immediately being destroyed. Like, it's true that we don't really have a lot of insight into specifically how powerful an intact Catan can be, but I've always interpreted it as them being the physical universe's equivalent of the Chaos Gods. So a Catan that ate all of the other Catan would be at a scale just below what would happen if all the Chaos Gods merged into one entity. But even worse, because it's not some metaphysical threat that merely influences our universe. It would be in here with us. As much as it pains me to say it, it would probably be better if the plotline involved him getting sharded. But let me know what you think of all this. Anyways, let me know all of your thoughts, comments, questions, corrections, and concerns down in the comments section below. Subscribe if you haven't already subscribed to the channel yet, hit the like button and ring the bell if you think I earned it. And as always, big thanks to everyone who supports all the work that I do, and I will catch you all in the next one.